Go on, Louise.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am as excited tonight as Boris Johnson at an IT lesson. That's how excited I am. As a feminist and an activist and a socialist and a historian, I couldn't be in better company because here with me tonight, 5 women who beautifully disrupted the Miss World contest of 1970. A lot of us have grown up looking at that footage, laughing at that footage of Bob Hope looking absolutely terrified. Really important, iconic event in the history of feminism. And I think if we had a pageant, if we were to have a contest for the most beautiful bits of direct action, we wouldn't have a swimsuit round, obviously, but I think definitely these women would be in there, and I would put them in context with the match women who in the 1870s attacked a statue that had been built by their employers to William Gladstone and made them pay for it. They were not happy. They brilliantly ruined Brian May's unveiling by stabbing their fingers with hatpins, dropping their blood onto the statue and saying, "Our blood paid for this." The suffragettes, the East London suffragettes, who on that same road, the Bow Road, years later, chucked a brick through the Bow police station window. The Glasgow rent strike women who met the bailiffs who came to evict people with football rattles and flower bombs, both of which will come into our story tonight. And the Miss World 1970 event. These are all part of a brilliant continuum of people taking direct action. Women cheered it then, and we've been cheering it ever since in the last 50 years. It was a brilliant confrontation of patriarchy and of the beauty tyranny, really, and not the contestants themselves. Of course, no one had any problem with the contestants, but with the awful focus on women's appearance, the awful objectification of women, which is still so harmful today, which makes women uncomfortable in their own skin, which makes their self-esteem suffer, which makes them unhappy with themselves. And of course, as we know, triggers mental health disorders and triggers eating disorders. So it was that these wonderful women were taking on. And it wasn't just a feminist event. It's really important to say this. The women were socialists, the women were anarchists, and they were challenging the patriarchy. They were also challenging capitalism, the great beauty industry, and they were challenging as well, believe it or not, the Vietnam War. Bob Hope, who made some absolutely obnoxious comments, if you've seen the footage on that night, was incredibly pro the Vietnam War and used all the beauty contests he chaired to go on about, disgusting comments about taking beauty contestants over to Vietnam to get the boys hot to fight the Kong. Really awful stuff. So it was all of those things. It was an incredible night. It was an important night. And it was a challenge to the system on so many fronts. So you may have seen the film. If you've seen the film, you still need to buy the book. You need to buy this wonderful book. I think Dave's got a picture of it. I think if I hold it up, it's going to be a little bit, have light shining in it. But the book, Misbehaving, you must buy it if you've seen the film. And you must also buy it if you have not seen the film. It is a wonderful guide to these women's lives, not just to that fantastic night in November 1970, but all the activism that they did before, how they came to it, and all the activism they've done since. So ideal Christmas present, I would say buy 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 copies for all your friends and family. It will be perfect for everyone at every occasion. So what I'm going to do is to chair different rounds. We're going to talk about different aspects of the women's lives and of that incredible night. And what we're going to talk about first is really what got them there. What got them to the Albert Hall? What got them to that Miss World contest? What raised their consciousness and what got them there politically? So, sisters, if we can start with Sue. Sue, can you give us a couple of minutes about what took you to the Miss World contest?
Louise, thank you. That was a brilliant introduction from someone who knows all about direct action. Thank you. Thank you to Bookmarks. This is wonderful that you organise it, but thank you more to everybody who's come. It's brilliant, wonderful to see so many. We think we can't actually see you. I wish we could. So for me, the journey to the Albert Hall started with the Women's Liberation Conference in February, that 1970. Didn't know much about women's liberation, had been campaigning about all kinds of things, but not that. And there were women trade unionists fighting for equal pay at that. There were women campaigning for free abortion and contraception, which wasn't available then. There were women arguing that we needed free childcare, all of which just set off light bulbs in all of our heads that went there. And many women's groups started up. Sure, half the people watching were in one too, but we talked and talked, and we really thought that being judged by our looks and being treated as objects was what made us powerless above all. And that there's a continuum between that kind of seeing women as objects and rape and murder. And we thought, I think the femicide census that came out this week shows 3 women a week are being murdered by their partners. We know that the rape statistics have gone horribly wrong, even worse than they were 50 years ago. Now, only 1.5% of those women who report a rape actually get a summons or a charge for the one who raped them. And of that, 7.5% finally get a conviction. So it's a tiny fraction of a tiny fraction. So we were angry, and that's why we protested. We weren't protesting against the contestants. We were protesting against the organizations making money out of them and making all our lives that much worse. So we came up with the slogan, we're not beautiful, we're not ugly, we're angry. We still are.
Perfect. And what a wonderful slogan that was, and so appropriate still today. All right, thank you so much for that, Sue. Jenny, can you give us a similar couple of minutes on what got you there?
Yeah, I'll have a go at it. So I grew up we all grew up during the 1960s, and I had 3 older brothers. I was in a family of 6 children, and there was always kind of a lot of talking and arguing around the dinner table. And there was these rumblings going on throughout the 60s, really, which was, my brothers were in CND. They went on anti-Vietnam demonstrations, Aldermaston marches. One of them was arrested a couple of times. But the real kind of background of the 60s was things like the Black Civil Rights Movement, the Black Panthers, the anti-colonialist struggles in Africa and Latin America. And it was just kind of rumbling in the background, really. I wasn't very politically aware. And it wasn't until I went to Essex University, and the students had taken over the university, and they were running something in 1968 called the Revolutionary Festival. And it was pretty amazing because of all these struggles going on all around the world. There was this kind of global movement of young people just traveling around. And at the Revolutionary Festival in Essex, there were political exiles from Latin America, from Africa, from Czechoslovakia, I remember. And most of it kind of was kind of lefty men in leather jackets in smoke-filled rooms talking about stuff which I didn't really quite understand. And it wasn't until there was the first Women's Liberation meeting at this Revolutionary Festival that Sheila Rowbottom came to talk at. And she was just talking about things like the history of women and how women have always been kept in the background and always oppressed. And suddenly all this politics started making sense to me for the first time, because when I was 17, my mum had left my dad. Now, my mum had brought up 6 children with no money of her own. And so there's a constant background of arguments about money. And it was devastating for me when my mum left. And it didn't make sense to me until I started learning about women's liberation. And then the light bulbs started popping on. Oh, that's what you did it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jenny. That's a really good answer. Jane, can we have a similar contribution from you, please?
All right.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenny. That's a really good answer. Jane.
Yeah, I'll try. I've been having trouble with the sound, but I'll give it a go. In '65, I left.
All right. Great. Thank you so much, Jenny. That's a really good answer. Jane.
Yeah, I'll try. I've been having trouble with the sound, but I'll give it a go.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, good. Okay, Jane, sorry about that. Unmute yourself, Jane.
Studied film in London.
Perfect.
It's the only school that accepted undergraduates.
Okay, Jane, sorry about that.
What brought me to the Miss World protest?
Unmute yourself, Jane.
Studied film in London. I'm being repeated.
Unmute yourself, Jane.
What brought me to the Miss World protest? The Dialectics of Liberation conference was huge for me. The event gave expression to all the elements of revolution, I thought. I went to Paris in May '68.
What brought me to the Miss World protest? The Dialectics of Liberation.
Courage and generosity of comrades.
Okay, sorry, Jane. We're having some real gremlins tonight, everybody. Apologies. I'm not sure what you can hear and what you can't hear at home, but we had problems with you there, Jane. I'm really sorry. We'll try to go back to you later, but no idea. Good old technology. It's wonderful when it works, isn't it? But goodness, it's a pain when it doesn't. All right, Joe, let's try, fingers crossed, let's try the same thing with you.
Okay. Do I unmute?
No, we can hear you.
You can hear me. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I came from Blackpool and came down to London, and I was completely, I hadn't got a political bone in my body, but I soon had a really sort of chaotic time. I had a total political awakening in London. It was like a baptism of fire. I met all these people who come back from Cuba and Paris, off the streets from Paris. And suddenly we got involved with Poster Workshop, where we made a voluntary group, but we made posters for liberation movements all over the world, and for movements about squatting, about housing. We were just hard at it, and we did these for free, but we did hundreds of posters. And therefore, I got this sort of complete education about what's happening in the world that I knew nothing about. So when I heard about Ruskin, when I got there, I mean, I didn't know what to expect. It was the first women's history conference in this country, and hundreds of women came. And I couldn't believe what happened, what I was hearing. I first heard about the position of women in society, women's role in society. I couldn't even think what it meant. It took a while for it all to sink in. And then there was a talk given by some women about the politics of housework. And that was a real eye-opener, because you know, they looked at it from the point of view from the sink, like That's where the trouble starts, in the sink. And they wrote their paper, The Politics of Housework. I mean, that was really eye-opening. And then there was a cartoon made later about that called Fall Into His Arms and Beware, You Might End Up in His Sink. So I loved that cartoon, and that said so much to me. The second thing at Ruskin I saw was there was a creche run by men. And those men had been the men that had originally laughed and poo-pooed the idea of the women holding a women's conference. But they majestically came in and ran a very successful creche, which freed women to attend the meetings. Then we began to talk about what we'd heard. Can you imagine what we felt to share our ideas and politics together? Not so much our politics, our ideas about how we'd felt oppressed. When we came together, there was a turning point when we all came out and we had a chance to sort of look and see and hear. And then we began to support each other over what our oppressions had been. As a result of that, we developed a feminist point of view, a consciousness on the spot. And
brilliant. Can you wrap that up for me, Jo? Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks. Wonderful. I'm so sorry to have to cut these women so short. It's all so fantastic. We could let them talk for hours and days, but sorry, we're on such a tight schedule. Sarah, can we hear from you? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Okay. I'm starting at the beginning of my sort of political awareness, which was 1967 in Algeria, where I spent 2 months. And I met a lot of young people who had fought the French very recently, been tortured as well, fought for independence. And I had a colonial upbringing in Sri Lanka, which when they learned it, they put me straight on that. Nobody was nasty to me, but I came to understand what it meant to have the advantages of colonialism and imperialism. And I felt as if I was in a washing machine. I came out of a tumble dryer and returned to London. And the anti-Vietnam War movement was in full swing, and I joined that and went on a lot of went to meetings and demonstrations. And also there was a rent strike in London, the Greater London Council, and I worked on that a lot, helping leafleting and going around from door to door and such things. And I had lived in Paris in 1966, and I returned there at the beginning of 1968, and whoosh, everything exploded in Paris. It was an extraordinary period, where so much was happening so fast. And I was there for about 3 months until July, when I had booked my ticket to go to Cuba. And I flew to Cuba, where I met Sue, got to know Sue and Jane and many other people. And that was a wonderful experience of politics. And then I returned, and I had been to art school, and I wanted to do something with my art. And I discovered Poster Workshop, and I went there, and that's where I met Jo. And we made posters for liberation movements. They were never our initiative. People would come and say, we want a poster for this, for that. South African, anti-apartheid, anti-Vietnam, also local things, California grape strike, many, many things like that. But these were all male dominated. And then there was Ruskin, and that was a sea change in politics for me and for all of us. To be in a huge room full of women talking about women's issues and what affected women. And it really was transformative. And afterwards, we all formed small women's groups. And there was an incredible network of information. And when the idea from the Peckham Women's Group was proposed for a demonstration against Miss World. The Peckham women had demonstrated the year before in 1969.
Thank you.
Okay, I just said that because Jane was going to say it, and she's sadly not there, so I wanted to put in what she was going to say a little bit. Okay,
Thank you.
thank
Thank
you.
you. That's wonderful. That's really great. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for summing that up, everybody. So you can see a really rich political tradition that all of these women came from. And then this real catalyst of that wonderful Women's Liberation Conference in 1970. And then through the Peckham Women's Liberation, the Peckham Women's Group, the idea comes, what if we do something at Miss World? And they did, as we know. So now for round two, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what actually happened on that night. Can we start with you, Sarah? Tell us where you were and what happened, what you did.
I was sitting in the stalls very near where the judges were sitting, because it had been decided that I and another person would give the starting signal with the football rattle, which I don't have the original, but there is one. But here, it's probably enough noise. So we were there. The first part, the reason there was a signal decided on was because the whole of the first part had been recorded the day before, and it was not live. And when somebody mentioned that in the meeting, we realised we had to absolutely be sure that we didn't act until it was live, because otherwise, well, it wouldn't be seen. And in those days, they couldn't cut a programme if it was on air, or they just went off air. So at one point, it was announced that it was now going to be live on air, and so that was it. And so the women went away, and they brought out Bob Hope, the compere who'd been flown over from the States. And he strutted onto the stage, and he swept around, and he started, well, firstly, he reassured the audience because there had been a bomb the night before in a van outside. And he said they needn't worry because there was very heavy security that evening and there wouldn't be any trouble, he said. He then got into a stride with cracks about cows and cattle markets. And he said he liked cattle and he liked calves, and he would go backstage and feel the calves. And he mooed and mocked and generally swaggered about the place. And he then said the lucky winning contestant would be taken to Vietnam and at Christmas, and she would give, as you said earlier, Louise, the GIs there, the hots, the better to fight the Kong with. And even the audience was getting uncomfortable with some of his jokes. And we decided it was time to go. So we slid out of our seats and I went down to the front. It was very dark and I started swinging the football rattle. And nobody moved, nothing happened. And I thought, oh my God, they've all chickened out. I'm here on my own, like the general, you know, who calls for his troops and they're not behind him. But everybody was getting their bags together and putting their stuff and getting ready to leap up into action. And then action began. It was incredibly exciting, and leaflets showered down from all the top galleries, and smoke bombs and flower bombs, and whistles were being blown all over the place, and other rattles. The acoustics in the Albert Hall is brilliant. And it was off. It was a massive. And Bob Hope tried to flee. He, you know, this brave man swaggering about the place, he tried to run away at the sight of a few leaflets and smoke bombs. But we learned much later that Julia Morley, the organizer, grabbed him by the ankle and wouldn't let him run away.
I love that image. Thank you, Sarah. I love that image of Bob Hope being grabbed by his ankle so he doesn't run off the stage, having been going on about Vietnam and, you know, what a swaggering warrior he was. Fantastic. All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. Sue, can you tell us where you were and what you did?
So I had leaflets and flour under an enormous coat because I was 9 months pregnant, so it was easy to hide them. And we didn't know where we were going to sit. We had a ticket each, so by myself, I got there. I'd never been to the Albert Hall. I didn't know how big it was. I heaved myself up to the very top, which is balcony where I had the ticket. And I didn't know that there were 5,500 people in the Albert Hall. And when Sarah's rattle went off, I threw the open bags of flowers. I didn't want to knock anybody out, and the leaflets, and they just floated down like snow. It was really beautiful. And then hugely surprising that there were maybe 100 other women in the hall, different sides of the hall, all over the hall, whistles blowing, smoke bombs going off. Because we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have internet, we had no way of knowing who was going to be there. It had all been word of mouth. And we only stopped the contest for about 10 minutes, but it was watched live by 30 million in the UK and 100 million worldwide. So it did make it into the news at the time.
Amazing. I love the details. I love the fact we all know that however much you plan a protest, there's always something that you can't bank on. And I think, yes, that awful moment where you think, is it really going to happen? Is it really not going to happen? It's just amazing. It must have been wonderful. I wish I'd been there. Jane, what were you doing? Oh, as Jane's still having problems, isn't she, with her audio? Jenny, what were you doing and where were you?
Sitting with a group of about 8 Essex women. We'd all driven up in a little van, and so we just heard kind of by word of mouth, I can't remember how, and we just all decided, we had a women's liberation group, yeah, we're going to do it. And so we got tickets which got us right up into the very top balcony. So we were sitting there in a row with this fantastic panoramic vision of the whole thing. And, you know, we'd collected our bags of flour and our smoke bombs and all sorts of paraphernalia, dressed up in this kind of weird assemblage of what we thought were posh clothes, to kind of smuggle ourselves in, because people actually dressed up in furs and tiaras, you know, was the event of the year. So it was kind of ludicrous in a way. You know, I was wearing a kind of grotty old Afghan coat and a dress that was far too small for me that I'd borrowed from somebody or other. So it was kind of ludicrous that we got in looking completely unlike all the rest of the audience, with all our smoke bombs and flower bombs and paraphernalia stuffed underneath our coats. And like the other two have said, we thought nothing was going to happen. We'd been sitting through these endless, awful jokes by Bob Hope, and nothing was happening. And we really thought, they've chickened out. We're going to be going back to Essex, and it's going to be a real anticlimax. And well. And then suddenly we heard the noise of the football rattle. And honestly, it was all so much better than what we'd ever hoped would be possible. It was suddenly, because we had a panoramic view from the top balcony, we saw the whole of the Albert Hall explode into this confusion of noise and shouting and clouds of flour, smoke bombs, football rattles, kazoos, women running down to the platform. And yeah, we got a bird's eye view of Bob Hope's look of utter amazement and dismay and cowardice, really. You know, literally his lower lip wobbled and his jaw dropped and his eyes went startled. And yeah, it was just brilliant. It felt so exciting that we'd actually done it. And I don't know if I can just finish by saying it, the way we organised in those days, it was kind of incredible that we did it, really, because I don't know quite how we managed to organise to get the tickets, to get ourselves there on time, to get all the paraphernalia, to know that the football rattle was going to be the signal. Goodness knows how we all communicated in those days, but we did, and it worked.
It was miraculous, but you certainly did do it. Jo, can you just give us a couple of minutes on what you were doing?
Well, yes, I heard the rattles and jumped up. And I'd been waiting so long. It was, I had to sit with people I didn't know, and there was a lot of light, and you couldn't see anybody else. I had no idea where my friends were and how it was going to take place. But when the rattles went, I jumped up and started pulling things out. I had a big arsenal in my bag, and I wondered what to do with how to start. So I started screaming with everybody else, and then I walked down towards the press, who I saw huddling in the corner, and I had some rotten veg, so I took that out and started throwing it at them, saying, take that and think about what you write about us, and railing against them. And then I went off up the stalls and stood in the stalls, and I stood near Jane, and a man who had flour on his back came towards us with a chair and lifted it up as though he was going to throw it at us. And I wasn't sure what to do at that point. I was just looking around and just joining in with hearing the screaming, and the banners went up at the side, and it was just so exciting to hear that noise. And then I went to the side, and I suddenly realised I'd been left alone in the hall, and everybody had been arrested and gone. And I had to get out. I was the only person left from the event. And I looked around, and there was a staircase to get out to the way I'd come in, and there was a door at the top. And so I went up there, and a bouncer came towards me and tried to stop me and stood in front of me. So I looked at my arsenal, and I had this water pistol. I'd forgotten about it, actually. I pulled it out and held it up and pressed the trigger, and all this blue ink shot out and sprayed him completely. And I thought about making it into a women's sign. It was a big circle on his front of his vest. I thought, oh, I haven't got time to do that. I better get out. So I ran outside, and I was chased by a plainclothes policeman who stopped and made me empty my bag, and said he found a prescription. He said I must be a junkie. And I said, excuse me, I'm pregnant, and those are my iron pills. So he said, you'd better get on a bus and go home and look after yourself. But hearing that, I just thought, there's more work to be done. I'm going to get on that bus and go down to the Café de Paris in Piccadilly, where I went and joined a crowd outside who were watching the Miss World people coming off the bus. And I had a smoke bomb, the last thing in my bag. So I pulled that out and lit it and threw it onto the pavement. And then I felt the strong arm of the law on my arm, and we were arrested and taken off to Bow Street Court, police cells for the night.
Incredible. Don't tell Jo Robinson to go home. She's not going to go home until she wants to go home. And it was wonderful because Bow Street Police Station, that was the very police station where Sylvia Pankhurst lobbed a brick through the window. Oh, fantastic. What an incredible. She would have loved that. She'd have been very proud of you. What a fantastic story.
What was interesting was the women in there in the cells that night said to us, plead guilty, love, and get it over with quick. And we went, no, we've got a story to tell. So he went on. Yeah. Exactly.
And that's what I don't think the film showed us, was that people were arrested and people were put on trial. And, it's quite a brave thing to do, especially people who are 5 months pregnant, as I think you were, Jo, 9 months pregnant, as Sue was. This is quite risking arrest. It's quite something. It's not nothing. Can you, Jenny and Jo, you were then on trial. Can you tell us in just a couple of minutes, and sorry to make it so short, Jenny, first of all, a little bit about that trial?
Well, the thing for me was making the decision about whether to defend myself or not. So the Women's Liberation Workshop had decided that we were to defend ourselves in the same way that the people who saw the trial of the Mangrove 9 recently on telly, 2 of them defended themselves. And so the idea was we were going to do the same, to, reject the court, reject the legitimacy of the man's law, and speak for the women's liberation movement and what it was all about. And there was me, 20 years old, you know, just left home. What, me? You know, and I actually was terrified at the thought of it. And I mean, even though I went to see Dark as How in the Panthers office above the mangrove, and you know, they told us about how empowering it is to defend yourself and be able to speak for what you believe in and question your witnesses direct. It was still terrifying prospect. And I remember, you know, it was a pivotal moment of my life, really, because I went off on my own and sat on a bench in a park for hours on end, kind of thinking, well, you know, either I do what my family expects me to do, be the nice girl, you know, apologize, put, you know, a nice winter coat on and brush my hair and go back to university, or I do what the women's liberation movement is all about, which is speak for my beliefs in public. And that was terrifying. But somehow, with the support of everyone who is around me, that just kind of carried me along and made it possible to decide to do that. And it was the most fantastic, empowering experience. You know, I never regret doing it. It did change my life. I did join the revolution, and I never looked back. Yeah, it was an amazing experience, but all because of the support of all the people around us and the movement around us.
Sisterhood and solidarity, so important. Jo, tell us a little bit about the trial for you.
Well, we wanted to question the authority of the court because we saw it steeped in patriarchal values. And it's also like the legal language that they use. When you came to what we were charged with, breach of the peace, it's gendered language. So it says all the way he breaking the peace. It doesn't say she. So I thought, you know, that's absurd how they have this age-old language going. So we spoke to a barrister who would offer to help, but she said she was interested and she looked into it, but she didn't want to do it. So at that point, I thought, well, there's the only way we can say what we really want to say in court and about women's liberation is going to be if we do it ourselves. And so I really wanted us to defend ourselves, because that way we could make the most noise and publicity and tell the world about why we'd done it, what we'd done, because it's hard to get across, you know, why people still ask, why did you do that? And so it was a whole education for us about how you deal with this, how you get your point across. So we thought the court was a great place to have a publicity, and we wanted to mock that sort of patriarchal edifice. And we decided to call the judge Daddy O, I think we called him. And we did everything we could to sort of delay the proceedings and make them last as long as we could, until in the end, the judge, the magistrate, he was like a comic uncle to begin with, but he got crosser and crosser. And in the end, he said there was to be no more interruptions, banging down his gavel, or we were sent down for the night. I did not heed this, and I interrupted once again with an objection. And so he said, that's it, down for the night. So we were put into a police van and carted off to Holloway, where we spent the first and only night, thank goodness. But he thought he did it to teach us a lesson. But in fact, it was the most amazing, another kind of lesson that I heard that night, being witness to the conditions of the women who were in prison.
It's so inspiring. It's so moving. I bet that judge had never been called Daddy-O before. I absolutely love that you undercut his pomposity and authority like that. The whole thing is the most incredible piece of direct action, and I think very inspiring for us today, as we're having to, in some cases, we're finding how important it is to move back to that with Extinction Rebellion. Anti-fascists, of course, continue to do direct action and always has. Black Lives Matter, very much in the same tradition of taking it to the streets and taking it to authority. I mean, we can't thank these women enough. The comments are coming in. Thank you so much for what you did. Your bravery opened the door for all of us who came after. We are deeply indebted to you. Right, sadly, we are getting a little bit tight on time. I could just listen to these women all night. I'm sure you could as well. If I can ask you to sum up just in a minute, which is ridiculous, what the most important activism that you've done since, because we want to focus on the fact that you didn't just do this and go home. You have been activists your whole life since. And if you could just tell us in a minute a little bit about that. So starting with you, Sue. We can unmute Sue. Can you unmute yourself, Sue? There we are. Perfect.
Hi.
Thank you.
Done. My eldest daughter was born 10 days later. So I think the bouncing down the stairs helped the process. But then there really wasn't any childcare in those days. So with a couple of friends, we knocked on all the doors and got a petition to the GLC. They gave us a house. We demonstrated on Hackney Council doorstep till they gave us a grant. We opened a community nursery run by parents. And that's still going today, 45 years later. And I guess the other main thing for me has been, I went to Green and Common quite a lot and became part of the kind of women's peace movement. And now I'm in a women's peace network called Women in Black. And we go to Faz Lane, where the Trident nuclear missiles are, and lie down in the road and get arrested. And we go to Aldermaston and to Burfield, the atomic weapons establishments there, and we lock ourselves into blocks of concrete, lie in the road, get arrested. It's direct action is still needed.
Absolutely.
There was more and more.
We need another film, don't we? We need a part 2 to this film, looking at your life since. Jenny, can you tell us a little bit about your life since? Can you unmute yourself? Perfect.
No, I can't unmute myself. Oh, I've been unmuted. Well, yeah, I've just been a lifelong activist. There's no doubt about it. And I think probably the kind of biggest part of my life came as a result of setting up a girls' club on the East End estate where I lived. And that, in a very roundabout way, leading me to believe that I could train to be an architect. Because we set up a big building project and we were searching desperately for a woman to help us design it. And of course, there were no women architects. So I kind of thought, right, yeah, we need some women architects. And just kind of very luckily, and with the kind of confidence given to me, really, by the women's liberation movement, I was admitted to university and I ended up kind of being sponsored to set up a women's design service, which was all about empowering women in projects. So in, community-based projects, I was financed to help these women design what they needed, all sorts of things: nurseries, training centres, mental health centres, women's aid. Yeah, so luckily I could take my activism into my work and kind of make things happen along with all the women activists around me, which was just fantastic to, have a skill which I could give to empowering women.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Jane, I'm so sorry about the gremlins that attacked you earlier. Hopefully now we can hear you and you can tell us a bit about your life since.
I think, Louise, it would be better that people who've already spoken are heard from. If I still have time at the end, I'll say something, but yeah.
Okay. Do you want to just give us a minute, because we've missed hearing from you?
Okay. All right. Well, after the event and after some time, I decided to train with other feminists at the time to be a midwife. And in that role, we formed an organization called the Association of Radical Midwives, which brought feminist principles into how we practice, developed visions for the practice of maternity care, which ultimately became mainstream, and still tons of work to be done. Activities still related to maternity care would be supporting and campaigning for the reinstatement of a woman-centered obstetrician who was suspended, engineered by male obstetricians, and also doing workshops with a Palestinian NGO in Palestine and for midwives in Palestine, and more recently working with Medical Justice to support pregnant women in detention and to end the practice, campaign to end the practice, which it did. Yeah. So it's been really work-based activism.
Just incredible lives that you've had. Thank you, Jane, for that. Joe, if you can be unmuted or unmute yourself and give us a couple of minutes on your life since.
Oh, I'm unmuted. I'm on now. Yes.
You're on.
Okay. Yes. Well, I became a midwife too, and I was a founder member of the Association of Radical Midwives that Jane's talked about, and after that, let's see, I did that, and then I went back. Then I went into teaching. In between, I became a founder member of the News on Sunday newspaper, which was a great left idea for a Sunday newspaper, radical news reporting and events. But it didn't get very far, but it was very great fun doing it. Later on, I lived in Walthamstow, started a pensions group. I've joined Unite Community, and we campaign about issues in the community, fought to save the square in Walthamstow from the development plans. I've joined Extinction Rebellion. I've been going into schools to talk to teenagers, young women about beauty, in relation to the Miss World thing, but talking to them about how they get the self-confidence to feel good about their own beauty, not being prescribed to them and made to feel they have to buy things, and to strengthen up their self-confidence. I've since got back into my art, and I've started a new 2-year art course, and most of the time now selling the book.
Let's just mention the book again. Absolutely. It really is so enjoyable. It's beautifully illustrated with the women's art, and honestly, absolutely essential purchase for everyone. Sarah, finally, can you give us a couple of minutes, if you can be unmuted, on your life since?
Okay. Well, as I said before, I was involved with Poster Workshop, and in that capacity, in 1969, I had gone to the north of Ireland. They asked us to send somebody over to make posters for when they occupied. They put barricades up, and from then on, I was for many years quite involved with Irish matters, and I was involved with the Troops Art movement in London. And quite a lot of that, was quite a lot of men and quite macho, but we tried to introduce an element. And I think we had some impact on women in Ireland as well. And I went on the march that led to Greenham Common Camp. It set off from Cardiff later in 1981. And for 10 days we walked, and a friend organised it with others to draw attention to the cruise missiles being brought there. But nobody took any notice. The press didn't take any notice. I went to London, rang newspapers, and they took no notice. Greenham Common, never heard of it. Cruise missiles, what are they? So women chained themselves to the fence, and the camp grew from there. But shortly after that, I moved to France, where I had spent quite a lot of time before. and have lived there more or less ever since. And over there I became involved with a group supporting Algerian women who had had to flee from the Islamic fundamentalists in Algeria for being journalists and intellectuals and whatever. And I paint.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you
So
so
that's
much.
been my...
I know I have to show you this wonderful illustration from the book, because you can see that they are indeed still misbehaving. All of our women still misbehaving, and I don't think they'll ever stop, and thank God for that. Okay, absolutely fantastic night. We just could go on. Some questions and some comments. Someone said, and I think says with some justice, that it's a damn shame we couldn't have appointed you all at Trump a few years later. Isn't it just? Wouldn't we like to see him running from flower bombs? That would have been marvellous. David bookmarks. Sally would like a copy of the book. Excellent. I'm sure everybody would, but Sally Kincaid would like a copy, so let's get one to her. One question, what do you think have been the most significant gains, and any of the women who would like to take this, just stick your hand up, the most significant gains of feminism since 1970, and why? Stick your hand up if you'd like to take it, otherwise I'll just pick on someone. Oh, come on, don't go quiet on me now. Sue.
Right. In a way, it's a heartbreaking question, because you can say, 1970 Equal Pay Act came into force 5 years later, but there's still a 16% gap, and women are still clustered in low-paid work. We could say that free contraception abortion has been a great improvement. We could say probably there are more equal access to education than there was in 1970. But perhaps if there's a gain, I would say we have free early education for children, part-time for the most disadvantaged 2-year-olds, part-time for 3 and 4-year-olds, full-time for working parents for 3 and 4-year-olds. So I think we really fought for that, and it's one of the gains, but there's so far to go. Not nearly enough, I think, is what's improved. Yeah. Anybody want to add?
Jenny.
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, I think something that really kind of shifted as a result of the 1970 women's liberation movement was the understanding that sexism is a thing, and that misogyny is a thing, and that women weren't going to put up with it anymore. I mean, that's what that action was all about, basically. And I think that's gone very deep with women, and I think that is still there. And I agree with Sue. I think there's a permanent backlash really against what women are fighting for, but I think that recognition, it's there now, but I do think it's not there enough with young women, and I think young women really do suffer again from sexism and misogyny, and we have to keep talking about it and how it manifests itself.
Absolutely. And as we've talked about, Sarah, yes, Sarah. Oh, can you unmute Sarah?
Oops.
There we go. Perfect.
It crossed my mind now that there aren't enough good tangible changes, but there is a change in consciousness. We had a change in consciousness from the time of Ruskin, and I think people are, as Jenny said, people are aware of sexism, misogyny. They can still laugh, but it's more. They daren't so much. I think it has made it a bit more mainstream, the whole idea of women's liberation, feminism, and women. And women can go to restaurants and pubs quite freely, which they didn't do easily in those days. It was actually, you got cornered and mocked. And there are a lot of things we do that we take for granted, but that were not available easily then. So It's a sort of intangible aura.
That's very true, and it is a permanent revolution. I can remember actually when if you went into a pub on your own as a woman, you know, but are you on the pool, love? It would be expected, or has he not turned up? It would be expected that you were waiting for your bloke and you've been stood up. Yes, absolutely. All right, some more wonderful comments. Jo Ellis Holland, lovely woman, a friend of mine, says this whole talk has been utterly brilliant. It makes me want to go into the kitchen, make flower bombs and disrupt something. And trust me, Jo would. She absolutely would. Any suggestions, she says, for events to target? If the police are listening, obviously we wouldn't dream of actually doing that. But any suggestions of events which we might notionally, theoretically target? What is there still to do? What needs a bit of your treatment, do you think, these days? Anybody?
Oh, contests.
Which contests? Say again.
Because they're still putting on the Miss
Yeah.
World contests in London, so they're open targets.
If we can get a flower these days, of course, that was very difficult during the first lockdown. Was it you lot? I'm thinking now, was that where all the flour went? Was it you lot storing up for your flower bombs just in case? Yeah, it does need doing again. And we've said in our chats, sisters, leading up to tonight, that the pressures are so much more intense now on women, aren't they, to look good, because we have the Insta, you know, we've got Instagram, all the pressure on social media. Women have having what they call Instagram surgery so that they can look good for Instagram. So although things have improved, consciousness has improved, you know, we're still under capitalism, which I don't know about the rest of you, I'm not keen on it, and it's always going to be oppressive, isn't it? It's always going to reinforce patriarchy, so it's always going to be a permanent revolution, and we just have to keep fighting. So what do you think, what would you identify as the biggest new problems that perhaps weren't so prominent when you were around? What do you think are the biggest problems we face and that we really need to tackle now that we haven't already covered? I mean, social media, Instagram. Yeah, Jenny.
I think at the moment, to me, one of the biggest problems is the kind of anti-immigration movement and what that kind of fostering as a culture in our country, which is kind of people being against each other. And I think social media is fostering a kind of very individualistic, very competitive kind of culture, which is kind of breeding, you know, such a kind of bad atmosphere and nastiness culture. Yeah, so those two things, I think we've really got to find ways of going against them, of changing the culture. And I think we are in lots of ways. Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
The Instagram thing's a bit more difficult.
Isn't it? Isn't it, Jess? But as you say, we can at least use social media for that as well, can't we? It's used against us, but we can use it for us again to organise. Sue, were you going to say something?
I think Jenny wrote a great chapter in the book called Miss World on Steroids, which is about beauty industry. And, you know, its turnover outstrips the car industry now. And everything about it means that women are having endless plastic surgery operations, being made to feel terrible about their bodies still. Women are becoming, in greater numbers, anorexic, bulimic, are having lives ruined by trying to look to a standard that really belittles everybody. So I think the beauty industry still needs some more attention than they're getting. Myself.
Doesn't it just? Yeah, Miss World on Steroids is a fantastic chapter in that book. Just another reason to buy it. Have we mentioned that you should be buying the book? As the historian Keith Flett, who's watching, says, important history, but absolutely relevant for 2020. That's the thing, you see. It's not history dead and gone in the past. It's interesting as history, but it's completely relevant now. These women have so much to teach us about direct action and about what we completely need to tackle now. All right, have we got any final words or comments that anyone would like to make? It's just been an incredible night. I think everyone will agree it has been an incredible night. Oh, someone says divide and, oh yes, I think this is a really good point, picking up on what Jenny said. Divide and rule, whether over sex or race, is forever a tool of the ruling classes. Isn't that true? And we've seen it used against us to absolutely horrendous effect. We've even seen people's paranoia increase through the QAnon and through all these conspiracy theory movements. So now we're dividing between people who will wear masks and people who will not wear masks, and people who oppose lockdown, people who don't. And the ruling classes, yes, absolutely, just sitting back and laughing at us, aren't they, while we do that? And the competition between women, we're so encouraged from birth to, more or less, to be the prettiest. We have to be the prettiest. It's the only relevant thing for us. We have to compete with other women for the resources, which is apparently men. We have to have male attention. I was thinking when I was talking to the women earlier about that song, Keep Young and Beautiful. It's your duty to be beautiful. Keep young and beautiful if you want to be loved, which sounds like kind of a fun song, but that's appalling, isn't it? Isn't that a ghastly, ghastly message? You can't keep young, everybody, you know, regardless of how beautiful you may be or how much you may care about that. You know, we cannot keep young. So we're being encouraged to do something which becomes increasingly impossible as time goes on, and just to loathe ourselves and to be uncomfortable in our own skin because of that. Okay, much work to do. Buy the book and let's make a start. Thank you. We're just about on time now, so can I just please say on behalf of everybody, what a wonderful evening. Thank you to these fantastic activists for everything they've done and everything they continue to do. Thank you, Jo Robinson, Sue Finch. Oh, everybody's names disappeared now. Okay. Sue Finch, Jenny Fortune, Jane Grant, Jo Robinson, Sarah Wilson. Buy that book, give it to your daughters, give it to your friends. Let's inspire a new generation of activists. Let's get those flower bombs made. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for hosting it so beautifully. And
it's
thank
been
you,
absolute privilege. Has been a joy. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.